you're right now in Switzerland, in Geneva.
Yes, so I've been living the pandemic on two frontiers. I was in Switzerland, but I moved to France to have the support of my parents, so that I could be on Seedstars front and also on the family front.
And right now, during the coronavirus crisis, how do you experience it? How does it feel?
It feels uncertain. There's a very optimistic side of you imagine how the world will be post pandemic, where there's a realization of how we need to treat one another, on how we should build a more sustainable economy, how we should consider sustainability in our day-to-day lives. So there's this very optimistic view that we will be better citizens and a better world for it. But right now it's hard to see because it's affecting people at all levels, and first at the level of health, and it's painful to hear, and then at a level of society, economy, how people are reacting to isolation, how people are reacting to the different supports for their businesses. And we'll see. It's in crisis situations that we'll see how our leaders and ourselves, Seedstars as a business, will come out of it, and how will they treat their citizens, their employees.
And specifically, can you name something that the outbreak and the crisis brought to your attention again?
Again, it's very reassuring to see the level of solidarity. I know that news is very much on counting the number of deaths, but there's such a level of solidarity, which I find extremely heartwarming. For us specifically at Seedstars, it came at a very interesting moment because we were to have our global annual flagship event in Switzerland. So it was over 1,000 people. We were reuniting. It was kind of the culmination of 1 year's work with a competition, with investment goals, and with educational programs. And in 3 weeks overnight, we decided that we would go online, and it was never an option to not do it, because it was also our way to prove that during tough times, we would stick to our core beneficiary, which was the entrepreneur. We would not let them down. They needed the support now. They needed the access to network now. They needed the investor meetings now. They needed the investments now. So we couldn't be the ones postponing 6, 12 months down the line. So everything we had built physically, we transposed it online. We had 80 participants at the startup bootcamp, which was a full virtual bootcamp. All our mentors, experts came in, 140 investor meetings. We were broadcasted our event on Friday with over, I think it was 6,000 unique visitors. And so I'm very proud of that, because it really proves, at least it comforts us in that we are doing our part with our capabilities and with our mission.
And kind of going online, what was your biggest learnings in that kind of time? 3 weeks only you had to kind of really prepare for this online experience and event. I mean, like, this is really amazing, the effort that you put into this and the outcome. Excuse me, I've seen it on Friday live, and I was just like overwhelmed by, seriously, like the level of quality that you put in, and you really kind of raised the bar. But honestly, like, in those kind of challenging and stressful times, what was the biggest learning?
So I think it's interesting because one of my co-founders sent an email to the full group, sharing kind of our official message to the crisis. And what we were saying was, more than ever, we will have to test the strength of our culture and our values. At Seedstars, we have 8 values such as get outside your comfort zone, independently together, or get shit done. And it's true, more than ever, they resonated in such a challenging moment. And what was unbelievable to see is that we have countless examples of initiatives around the world, from one of our talent, Mary in Egypt, that launched an online pandemic hackathon, to our Mexican team that launched a whole toolkit guide on how to perform online without management even asking. This was already a bottom-up approach where everyone was filling up their energy and using their capacity to support. So again, I think we are lucky in the sense that it was a very intense, positive moment that drove a very close-knit community. Everyone was willing to give them their all. Of course, there were stressful moments. Of course, there were outbreaks of emotions. Of course, there were members that were lost in translation across the level of quickness we had to act and decide. So it was definitely difficult times, but we chose it. We chose it together. We made the decision to go online. We made the decision to power through on this event. We made the decision that we would be here to provide new activities. So it's very motivating to see, actually.
And what was the response from the participants, like now with this twist in concept, like?
Yeah, so it was really interesting to see, because we actually became much more inclusive. So we in many ways were able to be even closer to the mission that we had. We had entrepreneurs, for example. I had recently received a message from one of our entrepreneurs, and she was saying that from Guatemala, going online, what could have been a curse became a blessing for her, because her full team was able to participate to all our programs and interact with our different mentors and experts. She was kind of overwhelmed by the level of visibility that they had. They felt the energy of our team, because it was really 30 people hustling in the background, making sure that everyone was good in their Zoom outbreak sessions to preparing a podcast on their story. I hope that was the objective, that people would feel the energy that we had built physically during a virtual experience, and it was extremely well taken. So we are really considering how much of this will be part of our future strategy and how we interact with our entrepreneurs, especially when you think of scale.
Speaking of scale and change, how did Seedstars, the concept, kind of evolved over the last years?
So the mission was always very clear. It was, how were we going to support sustainable, profitable, impact-driven businesses in emerging markets? When we were on the ground, what we realized, there were 3 main elements where we could provide support for especially early stage businesses, because in the cycle of businesses, there was really a gap. And it felt like they needed a voice, because no one knew about them. 7 years ago, most of these ecosystems weren't even talked about, and probably most people wouldn't know where they are on the map. So we had to be a voice. We had to give them access to a network, to tools, to an education. And when I say it is entrepreneurial, soft, hard skills that help them scale their business, that help them train talent equipped to scale their business. And of course, investment. And so across these 3 pillars, we've been building initiatives that have evolved according to the market, according to its maturity. And so hence we've continued to follow the entrepreneurs. So what were only early stage businesses are now much more mature businesses with different challenges and needs. And our programs, the way we render them visible and the type of investments that we put have changed.
I mean, like, sometimes I'm wondering, like, what would be different from your concept right now for the emerging markets compared to developed markets already? Like there is a lot of programs for the developed markets, but what would be different, or what is the main difference? What would you say?
There are a lot of similarities because fundamentally the challenges of an entrepreneur are quite similar. Then it's how do you approach these different challenges? And it depends on if there is more or less an infrastructure, more or less a need of verticalizing your supply chain. How do you manage your teams with such infrastructure and support? Or if there is a real talent gap. But overall, there are a lot of similarities. For us, we would only consider ourselves credible if we were entrepreneurs ourselves. So we never approached this as investors or as educators. We approached this, or in a more academic fashion, we approached this, it will be by entrepreneurs for entrepreneurs. And that meant that we needed to launch our own businesses in these markets so that we would have a real understanding of what it was. That meant that 95% of the team is on those markets, not in Switzerland, or we had to be on the field to understand what it meant. And that was always the approach from day one. So we've always been in parallel launching and scaling our own businesses, which was also a model of scale that we believed would be a way to also create more jobs on the ground. But it really had a strong purpose for us because we would be able to walk the talk. So everything we also learned as entrepreneurs would be shared to the community, and what we would learn from the community would support us also in becoming better entrepreneurs. And so there was this kind of virtual iterative learning machine that's being put in place.
This is fantastic. And I think like this is really the difference from a lot of programs that we see nowadays, specifically in the developed countries. So you spoke like you create your own startups, you invest also outside of your own startups into other people's startups. Over the course of time, how did you experience maybe there is a change in the kind of investments done in emerging markets? Can you elaborate and maybe explain a bit more?
So already we had to figure out what was our target entrepreneur, because it's a large kind of community. There are the micro entrepreneurs, there are the SMEs, and there are also these what we call, through different studies we've been reading, high growth ventures. And we really wanted to focus on high growth ventures because they proved in the past that they had already a very strong innovative component, and that was something that appealed to us and our interest in technology, but also a capability of creating an important amount of jobs over the course of their scaling phase. So we launched businesses that would support financing of micro entrepreneurs and SMEs, but our programs were tailored mainly for high growth ventures, and that needed other types of investment vehicles. And that was the approach. So we would be able to find investment mechanisms for each category, even though the focus was on high growth ventures. Sometimes, especially with our key partners, we would start with grants, and then we would transform quickly in different investment criteria that would support them at every level of their business. But today we have a Seedstars fund that takes equity, like a European VC fund, to invest in these high growth ventures.
And what would you wish for yourself to change and maybe to happen that Seedstars actually much more beneficial to all your entrepreneurs that you're targeting and work with?
So many ideas, but it's true. You would want a faster acceleration, like an acceleration of support on the educational part, but also on the investment side. So it would be great to have more exposed investors to these ecosystems and understanding of what is impact investment, which is basically the umbrella under which we are put when we speak to the European community, or tomorrow it will be another name maybe, but it would be great to see people more equipped in understanding the potential, so that they would be willing to invest, and that they understand that when you do impact investment, part of the return is not just the financial return, and it's important to prove its profitability, and we are convinced that it's a profitable model. And we already have the track record and the investments to prove it. But the return also you're working for as an investor is the impact. And that is as important in how you grade an investment or make an investment. And so that's something that still is, I feel that it's infancy in many markets. But I mean, we've been here 7 years, and trust me, it's changing. So we're positive also on that front.
And where do you see accelerator programs and startup competitions heading towards in the near future?
I think, like many of these initiatives, there will be a fatigue of it, and so we will have to adapt. So, for example, the competition for us is a huge source in terms of providing visibility for entrepreneurs, but also in terms of sourcing potential entrepreneurs and talents for the different programs that we have. Our programs are actually becoming, by default, it's been now over 9 months that our programs are more and more online. So it was even before the pandemic, because there was, you realize that that a lot more equipped entrepreneurs virtually want to participate in these programs and don't have, because of family situation or because of economic reasons, can't necessarily move from one place to another, and it doesn't make economic sense to launch a program physically there. So we're really seeing kind of a global community of wannabe or young entrepreneurs that want to learn. We're also seeing more and more of a co-development approach with corporates, which is very, very interesting, because it has much more impact if the client, supplier, investor is one of the big players in the industry that this entrepreneur is playing with. And they seem to be several corporates more comfortable with working with their potential competitors rather than just waiting to be taken apart or threatened. So that's also, this co-development programs are much more tailored in understanding how do you connect such young businesses with larger elephants, and what are the appropriate tools to support a scalable model without consuming everything, the essence of a young business, which is much more innovative and agile. So there are definitely changes that are taking place, and going virtual is one of them.
And there was also a lot of talk about, like, how can we actually bring much more female or women as entrepreneurs specifically into the innovation and technology fields. How are your experience? What would you kind of advise? Like, what would be a straightforward way to not only get the women excited about those issues and those kind of topics, but actually really kind of empower them to take that path?
So we can do a lot as different organizations, but if we want a systemic change, it has to come from a nationwide kind of initiative where government is heavily involved in the education system to redefine kind of the rules and provide support for families so that they can actually consider children and young women to participate. Unfortunately, at Seedstars, we are representative of the global statistics of when you look at the different entrepreneurial communities, you're between a 10 to maximum 30% of women kind of representation, and it's more around 10, 15%. We're very much surprised in some ecosystem, like, for example, in Jordan, where we meet unbelievable women entrepreneurs, but also because there is very strong female role models at the top of authority that are showcasing that it's not an issue and that it's completely possible in how society is being built. We see in many countries, because the bigger traditional industries are cut out for women, ICT has been a real way for them to engage in the workforce, and so there are usually more women engineers than men, but it doesn't necessarily translate into more businesses led by women. So what we've tried to do is, for a long time I was against quota, but I guess that until then there needs to be a real conscious effort from your team, and that means sometimes adding more resources to access a wide enough representation of different communities and channels, so that you can make sure that you have enough women participating as jury, that you can have enough women actually applying for your competition, that you have chats and channels dedicated to them if they feel like the competition, for example, is too aggressive. We got a lot of feedback from women that this is not how they approach business. They don't speak the aggressive, overachieving numbers. They're usually more conservative. They want to engage on a one-on-one basis. They want to take on several meetings. So we've tried to tailor these approaches for them, with a target that we hope from application to the winners of Seedstars and the participants of our programs, we would get to a 30% by end of next year. And then we would hopefully arrive to 50-50. But it's hard. And that means that we had to be very conscious of the errors we were doing internally. So how are we recruiting? We saw there was a lot of studies that proved biases around the words you use in your job description and the channels you go after, because the startup jargon is a very specific jargon which is not tailored which is not very inclusive. How do you retain women talent internally? How do you train your leaders to manage such diversity in their teams, because they maybe have lack of experience and knowledge? How do you address mostly, which is unconscious bias? We don't have conscious bias to treat. How do you make sure there's a senior management which is representative? So we've broken down all the elements also internally to make sure we had best practices and experience ourselves when trying to then look into our programs and the different initiatives and how we could be better at it. But it's not easy, and it is a short-term cost that is not evident for all businesses that are trying to survive. So it's work. Fortunately enough, at Seedstars, we were remote and international from day one. So diversity has always been part of our DNA. It's never been a nice to have. I think in Seedstars, we're 50-50, women, men. I think it's 49%, 51%. So it's never been an issue, but I do understand that it can be, and when it is, how do you transform this cost in investment, and how do you really see it fast enough so that it becomes part of your DNA?
And lastly, I would love to ask this question because we are also running out of time. If you weren't running Seedstars, what would you be doing?
No clue. That's how overwhelming Seedstars is. No, it's crazy. I don't see my life without Seedstars, I really don't know. It doesn't mean I'm stuck with Seedstars. It's just with all the disadvantages and lows I've lived with Seedstars, it's still the most authentic path where I feel like I'm the most myself and growing. So as long as this seems to be okay, It's not like I'm imagining something else, but no, it's really hard. And I don't know if I would be necessarily an entrepreneur. I became an entrepreneur because I found the right co-founders. I have a huge respect for solo founders, which for me is just another level. Just another level. I wouldn't be able to answer that question.
Thank you so much, Alisée.